Microphone check. Microphone test. There we go. There we go. Microphone test. Friends, our forum is going to begin in 1 minute, so come on up, have a seat, and we will start in just 1 minute. Okay, we are so excited to have Thomas Plant here still this morning for our forum. If you were with us in the fall on our FPL trip to UU Urban Ministry, you heard the amazing tour that Thomas gave of the site. And I'm going to turn things over now to our own Alice de Normandy to share more. Let's welcome Alice.
Well, I'm so glad to be here today with Thomas. He was a very, very good friend of my parents and their work at the Urban Ministry. And I feel like I'm continuing in their footsteps. And I said to Thomas, you must have been very young when you knew my parents, because he's still doing all the good work he's done over the years. So I want to just introduce a little bit about my family relationship to the Urban Ministry. My great-grandfather and the great-grandfather of Sarah Cannon Holden, because we're cousins, was the minister at the First Church in Roxbury from 1883 to 1917. And for those of you who are interested, if you walk up the steps to the choir loft, there is a plaque that indicates that he was also the summer minister here for many years. And so it's really a very nice continuation for Sarah and me to have Thomas here today. So let me just tell you, he wears two distinctive hats. First, he has had a long and distinguished career in the...
Only one on today.
Huh? Oh, sorry. Don't get me flustered. I'm trying to be very professional. Okay, shall I start over? Okay. You have one hat, but you carry in your history two distinctive hats. First, he's had a long career in the field of public health, particularly with the Boston Public Health Commission Environmental Health Office. And he's worked on issues related to childhood lead poisoning, but he's also done work about affordable housing. Second, Thomas is a historian by avocation and has served in a variety of positions, among them president of the Roxbury Highland Historical Society, a board member and church historian of the urban ministry, and as well as president of the First Church of Roxbury congregation when it was flourishing. Mr. Plant, and I'm going to call you Tom, okay? Okay. Tom was born in Villa Rica, I said it right, Georgia, and was raised in Dayton, Ohio. He completed university work in chemistry at Central State University and at the University of Lowell in Lowell, Mass. Given that this year is the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, Tom will be talking with us today about the role of Roxbury citizens in this American War, with special emphasis on the roles of its African Americans in the struggle for independence. He offers a rare glimpse into the lives of some individual Roxbury African Americans and their contribution to American independence. I'm going to ask Tom if he would be willing to start with an interesting statement he made about Roxbury that we discovered in one of the online descriptions of his work. Quote, "Roxbury's history has been swallowed up by Boston's history. People have a strange idea of what is Roxbury, so it is not really cherished." Not really cherished. Tom, some of us here are new to Boston and don't know much about Roxbury. I hope you can take a few minutes to explain the community and your thoughts that are reflected in this poignant quote. Tom Plant.
Well, first, let me just say very quickly that I'm happy to be back here at First Parish in Lincoln. As you said, I had come out here with Jim and Martha de Normandy. I've been able to sit in the pew and enjoy church service here in Lincoln. And there's that connection, as she's mentioned, that James de Normandy was our minister from 1883. And of course, he was also the minister emeriti as he was doing the summer services here in Lincoln as minister. And of course, our relationship goes even further because after church, we'd go to the house on Trapello Road and we'd have lunch or dinner, and we'd have great sharing and just laughter, because we forget about that. Things that give us joy in life. And that laughter lasted for generations. And yes, I was pretty young when I met them, so I was in my 20s. So 50 years later, you can figure it out. But yes, that statement is that when I started getting involved in the history of Boston, and I found people invited me to come up to, first I met Carl Scoville, because I had come up from Dayton, Ohio. He had come up from Cincinnati, and he was the minister at King's Chapel. I came in there with this big T-shirt on that said Discover Dayton, and he stopped me, and he says, "Wow." I said, and he said he'd just come from Cincinnati. He's going to be the minister here at King's Chapel. Would I like to come? And I said, well, yes. But someone had invited me to come up to Roxbury. And I went that week, and I met all the people there, and I felt I was called almost to be in Roxbury. Got involved with the congregation at that time, Tom Payne, who was the minister at large for the urban ministry, and his work in Roxbury with the youth. We said, well, we want to have church service, and so we had church service on Wednesday. It got to Sunday. Finally, we were able to get large enough to support a congregation there. But let me fast forward and talk about the topic of today. One of the things I found out that Roxbury's history was not only disregarded, no one talked about it. They had a major, major, major part in the siege of Boston. In fact, it was fought on their land. Roxbury was a separate town, just like Lincoln. Wasn't part of Boston. But when Boston annexed it in 1867, 68, it lost all sense of self, all sense of determination, all sense of its history. The siege of Boston, where we had everyone converging, all the patriots converging on Roxbury, overlooking Boston. They were up in the hills. The British were down in the Charles River Valley in the city of Boston. They didn't have cannons, but once they brought the cannons back from Fort Ticonderoga, they had the elevation to reach into Boston with their cannons. They fortified Dorchester Heights overnight, and the British realized they had a problem on their hands. They were in the killing fields, and all the cannonade could reach into downtown Boston. They told General Washington, we're going to fire the town. And they said, well, we won't fire it if they don't fire on them. So the British were allowed to evacuate. They didn't fire on them. They could have sunk all their ships off of Dorchester Heights, but they didn't fire Boston because they said they wouldn't fire on them. So they left. But that was the beginnings of the issues for Roxbury as well. Now, what happened? During the siege of Boston, troops were all around in the hills around Roxbury. African Americans were some of those troops. What troops do you talk about? Well, at the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Bucks of America were there. Colonel Milton and other African Americans joined together and fought at Charlestown, or Breeds Hill as they called it, and they were kind of forgotten. Even though Governor Hancock had given them a flag that still extant today in the Massachusetts archives on Columbia Point in the museum. That flag with a stag was given by Governor Hancock and his son to the Bucks of America. Now, other troops that fought, and I want to particularly mention this one, is the 1st and 2nd Rhode Island Regiment. They were predominantly black mulatto and some natives. They fought all the way from the moment they were formed all the way to the final battle in Yorktown. So that means General Washington could count on them. While other people pulled up and went back home when they got tired, they fought all the way through to the end of the war. The 2nd and 1st and 2nd Rhode Island Regiment. Now, what did they look like? Well, obviously they were African American. We say African American now, but African. They were also mulatto. They were also natives. They wore white buckskins. Now, I can't tell you, white buckskins, you can be seen any place. And that's a good target. That's the target that you want if you're for the British. But they wore those. They were very courageous. They fought through to the end of the war. The other troop was the 4th and 8th Connecticut. mostly mulattoes. Now, why did they have guns? They had pikes. One of the things that happened was they were discussing whether they wanted to arm African Americans. Would they cause an insurrection? Because they were slaves. Some of them were slaves. They weren't free. Adams argued against it. Don't arm them. Washington finally armed them. But those in the Connecticut unit died with their captain, Greene, in Ledyard, Connecticut. Now, we know what Ledyard does down there in Connecticut today. It's one of our submarine bases. But there is a plaque to those men who died in that spot, and particularly African Americans. But we don't talk about it. We don't mention it. And I think for all the people, individually, in groups, America does not mention them in the history of the Revolutionary War. And it's particularly poignant as we're celebrating the 250th Massachusetts Revolution. Here, most of the towns got some money. We put in the application. We didn't really get any money. Where the siege of Boston happened, we as a community didn't get anything. I don't know if it's because they thought we were Boston, but Roxbury didn't get any of that money of the 250th. So there's despair there. There's despair and discrepancies about why didn't you get it? Are we going to remember what happened here? Yes, African Americans were there. One of the reasons that they continue to have lack of coverage for history is that they don't teach it anywhere. You have to dig to get this information from different books, different journals, different published books on African Americans in the Revolution, even though there might have been anywhere from 1 to 5,000 men fighting in the Revolution. So it's a despair for not only those people that fought, but for the people who live in Roxbury today don't know that history. They don't have that sense of belonging. So when Patriots Day comes up, I was in my colonial garb on the tee. They said, well, there were no black people back there in the 18th century. I told them, you're wrong. There were plenty of us there. You remember Christmas addicts? Ah, they heard about him. They hadn't seen him, but they heard about it. So I went on and I talked about many other people, and I said, did they know about the Rhode Island Regiment? No, they didn't know. So it's about educating our own residents about the history of their own community, now a neighborhood of Boston, how important the Roxbury siege, or the Boston siege as they call it, was important to the formation of our country. And that was one of the first, after Lexington, one of the biggest battles that took place, but few people were killed. And because they evacuated out, no cannons had to be fired on ships and sunk. But it led to the Revolutionary War, obviously, and the formation of our country. African Americans have fought throughout all wars of the United States of America. They don't get credit, rarely got pensions. My grandfather, great-grandfather fought in those wars. My father and his brothers fought in World War I and II. They got treated to segregation. They got no money. Most people, when they started the GI Bill, were able to buy homes. Not many African Americans got pensions or got GI Bill loans to start their new lives in the new home. So this was very typical in the Civil War as well, where we talk about the Massachusetts 54th and 55th Division. They fought, they died, they didn't get paid. They said they wouldn't get paid until all got paid. They finally got paid. Later, many had died. Many never collected. And it took up until, I think, Bill Clinton to honor them, and some got paid in terms of the pensions that their families deserved. So what's the real moral of the story is that, we're all interconnected. We, as you say that, the interconnected web of all existence, which we are a part. I believe that. I live and sleep that. And particularly now, when we see our government trying to erase diversity, erase recognition of General Powell, wow. At the Pentagon, they want those photos removed. Wow. Benjamin O. Davis. There's just so many people that we as Americans have to stand up for. And we have to stand up for fairness, justice. We have to stand up for telling the entire history of our country. Now, why do some people feel, well, they don't want to talk about that? We have to accept who we are or were at that time and who we are now. We can say we've learned that we all must share the successes and our failures. But as a country, if we're united, we're strengthened by us working together to form a better union. Now, just early on, the urban ministry started to look into why young people weren't being really working with the civics of the community. And one of the reasons is because they didn't see the connection. So they started to seeing ourselves in the world, the sense of place and belonging. So they start working with the youth, and we started to look and talk about our history. And we started to say, let's form that history committee to start looking at our own close histories. And we started saying, let's start teaching them the skills to look into their own family histories. And so the history committee last year hired 2 research fellows after the Abbott report on 58 enslaved people at First Church in Roxbury. To take that further, we hired those 2 research associates or fellows. One's at BU as a PhD student, Mary Snyder, and one is Mika Kane, who is an MIT graduate student. And Mary Snyder has had a lot of experience working with enslaved people at plantations in Virginia, and as well as Mika Kane did a lot of work in Columbus, Ohio, African Americans in the textile industry. We brought them together, and they looked at the Abbott Alibi's report, and they started to research it. They came up with a very interesting connection, which was Benjamin Boudinot and Lydia Crafts. This was one of the first interracial marriages in Massachusetts. And they were at First Church in Roxbury. Wow. Now, at the time, they couldn't get married at First Church in Roxbury. They wouldn't do it, so they had to go down into the North End, and Mr. Mather had to give them wedded bliss. But their histories and their movement from Roxbury to New York to New Jersey to Ohio to Indiana, they were out in Kansas, and they're all the way up into Oregon. So we traced that history. Now we want to invite those people back when we have the First Church Meeting House restored, commemorate those who were enslaved, and also have the descendants to come back and celebrate the history of First Church in Roxbury. We're coming on the 400th anniversary of the church founding in 2030. So we've got 5 years. Right now I'm involved with working and extending the History Committee's work, and also to continue to search for those descendants of those enslaved at Roxbury. But more open, I'm on the board of Urban Ministry, and they're doing great work throughout the Roxbury community. And we've had new board members, and some of you will be at the delegates meeting next month. So we're looking forward to seeing you there, and we're going to also be able to hopefully give that final report that Mary's working on. And this will be online, and you can go to the UUM website and make it available to those things in terms of the work that they've been doing and the PowerPoints that will be there. But it's very exciting work. So we are creating a new revolution in Roxbury. And that revolution will talk about the history, the full history, the good and the bad, and so forth. So we're glad to talk about that here in First Parish Lincoln, and hope to invite you there to tours of the church, come and see the programs that are being developed and worked there, and the youth program, as well as the community itself. It's not scary. As the news might have you might see, it's where people live, people have life, and it's a very loving community, arts as well as education, and people have dreams that they hope they can share with the full Boston community. And we think it's worth sharing with others. And so thank you for, I know you have some questions, and I can take them if you can.
Before you go on, can you just talk about the groups of guides and the bus tour to make it possible for people to learn?
Yeah, so the youth program is also developing tours of their own. And it's not just the historical tour, it might be arts tour, it might be music tours, but they will be having those. They also looking at app development, and as well, I did go through one of them, and we kind of tested it, and it was very, very interesting, and I think it's very good. They just do some little small tweaks to it, and I think they'll have that available. And there will be bus tours and so forth. There'll be tours in the meeting house as well as the neighborhood. So the youth program is doing very, very well. Thanks to Reggie Walker and Abby Sarrow, who've come on board. We have Robert Jones has been brought on to the urban ministry to do community engagement. And Mary Margaret will be speaking more to the congregations as her time is freed up. And then I will be sort of talking as well when I get a little more freer to do this for the urban ministry. So thank you.
We have some questions?
Yes.
When I was in
Oh, okay.
When I was in college in the 60s, Roxbury was, we thought, scary, and I never went there. But I think that that's a very distorted picture of what the community was like. And can you talk about the sort of economic status of the community and the racial status over the last couple of hundred years? But
Well,
quickly.
I can tell you that the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston did a report on the economics of the black community, particularly on Roxbury. The average at that time, this is back about, I guess about 15 years ago, the average worth of a white person or family was $247,000. African American in Roxbury, it was like $25. They didn't know if they'd be able to have, much alone rent or own, that wasn't in their purview. Roxbury itself, there was a high degree of people renting apartments. Very few, under 10%, own their own property. So the economics were very, very inequitable. And it's still that way because of the redlining by banks, the mortgage, toxic mortgages happened, foreclosures happened highly in the 90s. In Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, all the communities of color, there was high rates of foreclosures because they had toxic mortgages. They kept stepping up and they couldn't pay those. So now you can imagine a home in Boston, even in Roxbury, you can't find anything for $700,000. 1.5 million. You know, 700,000, you got to do some fixing. So you don't have the income to even do that. Yeah. I hope I answered your question. Yeah, go ahead.
Peter.
I'm hoping that you can tell us who should we get in contact with to tell them that we want to have this historical record corrected. There must be some institutional kind of people that we could press to make it right.
I think the first thing you can do is to look locally, and the Massachusetts Archives, the museum holds a lot of information, but it has to start in the neighborhoods in the city of Boston, and we have to say we want a complete history of the Boston. Let's say even the Tea Party ship. Who was doing it? Who were they? What are the people who were fought in the revolution? Why can't we see all their names? And so forth. So it can start there, but we have to say that to people in places of power. So that's the governor. That's Bill Galvin, who controls the museum over on Columbia Point at UMass Boston. So we have to do that kind of research. But that research needs to happen now, because if we let it slide, we see what our government is doing. It's trying to bring us back to a time where you're invisible, you're erased, because they're taking pictures who, I mean, in the Pentagon, you figure, okay, he's a four-star general, he's on the, you know, Colin Powell's name should never be erased. Benjamin O. Davis' name should never be erased. All those who fought in the revolution should be accounted for and taught in our schools. And that's about our education boards as well. So, yeah. you can demand that because it's not being taught. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I wanted to build on that and just mention yesterday I was at the Concord Museum, and it has an amazing map. So I could just see it's an interactive map of the colonists coming and the troops and everything that you were talking about with Roxbury. And I wonder, in terms of an avenue that the Concord Museum, in terms of organizing through to really demand or advocate for museum equity and ability to storytell, not just from one venue.
Yeah. I think that's a good thing to ensure that we have a complete history of everyone's involvement. Because we don't knock the Patriots themselves, because they didn't knock it themselves either. They thought about it, but once they saw, hey, we need every man available, even women. Deborah Sampson felt compelled to fight. She dressed herself up as a man, tied her bosom down, and she fought in the Revolutionary War from Plymouth.
A question about the researchers that you have working. I think you said there are two, one from BU and the other from MIT.
Yes.
Are those casual sort of happenstance relationships, or are the institutions somehow committed to furthering that work?
The Urban Ministry hired them. I interviewed them myself, and we thought they were the best candidates. Mary Snyder had done a lot of work in Georgetown and some of the historic Whitney Plantation work on recognizing the people who were enslaved there. So she had the best resume and the experience. Amika Kane had additional experience. And what happened is that once they did the initial work, and Mary's still writing her report, we had 3 workshops for the young people and adults in Roxbury on searching their own roots, their own history. And we work with the New England Historic Genealogic Society, now American Ancestors, which was just dedicated on Newberry Street just the other day. They went down and they had these 3 workshops where they were able to get skills and to learn how to do their own genealogic searches. And I can tell you myself that I was able to do that for my own family, which I was for years looking, well, how did we get the last name Plant? And I found out how, because there were a family, William and Lucretia Plant in Georgia, enslaved my whole family. My great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, but the good news was, even though they were enslaved, they were kept as a family. And so they stayed in that same area of Georgia. Villa Rica was about 20 miles away. And now that whole area is part of my relatives down in Georgia. I can still go down there. We still have the farm. We have about 70 acres of it left. But it was allowed me to have a sense of belonging and place, the respect of my parents. So they're part of the U.S. African American historic thing that the Ancestry has, as well as the U.S. Census Bureau. So there's ways to get that information, but you have to do the search. We develop those skills for the young people, and so this will build on them searching their own history. And New England gets the benefit of that information in the American Ancestors. Yes.
I cannot say how much gratitude I have for what you guys are doing and everything. When you started talking, you mentioned about how these things are not being taught in our schools and high schools, college, and all that. And my question is, and I know this is complicated now that education department is endangered species, but
Yeah.
what will it take to instill some of these historical facts in our curriculums from high schools, middle schools, college? And have you guys started whatever it takes to begin that process?
Well, we started locally, but I think it can build. I think we definitely want the Department of Education to ensure that all our children understand the history of our country, inclusive, not just the small things about it that they've heard, but teach the full and comprehensive history of the country. Therefore, they know this is a country of diverse people who've all contributed whatever they could to make this country successful today. And I think when we start that, we will be that understanding that everyone has the inherent worth and dignity, and they deserve that information, so that we don't have another generation growing up thinking that I'm better or I have a better history than you, because we all have our histories. And we can all be proud of those histories because we struggled, but we reached a place where we can hold our heads high. And you don't know that unless you know where you came from and who you are. What have I done? So you need that sometimes to be written down somewhere, and you're the best person to do that. Get your family history, get it down. Once it's archived somewhere, someone else can get that information and know that you had that sense of place, you belong, you contributed, and they can't erase you.
Another question? I think one of the great things the Urban Ministry is doing is supporting young people who are learning about their history and incorporate that as part of their tours that they give in the city. And the new leadership of the youth programs are doing wonderful work at the Urban Ministry. They have a program after school where students come for to work on their whatever projects or homework. They also have small groups. And one of the things that struck me is they have a bus, which we as a congregation provided through a Preston grant.
That's right.
And that bus delivers all the kids home to their door, so they don't have to, get on public transportation or walk in a lonely street or whatever. And I think that is amazing and worth our support 100% to help, just what Tom is saying, for them to know they're supported and given a step up in their own history, and it's amazing. And I also want to just say that the renovation of the meeting house is going to be a wonderful place to meet and to share ideas, to share music. I mean, just think of Miranda's initiative.
Yes.
And maybe she can play on the organ and the choir can sing, and we can bring the organization in Roxbury that is getting our money, and they can participate too. I mean, how exciting would that be for us as a congregation to be part of that?
We would love to have them come. So,
Any other questions?
yes.
Did you raise your hand?
No, I was thinking my coffee.
Oh. You can say something.
I was thinking about the power, the danger of a single story. And what you said, and I just want to back what Eddie was saying, was extremely informative for some of us that are not from this region. If we don't know our past,
Right.
we will not know our future.
That's right.
And so all of us are, in one way or the other, part of this future. The little we know more,
Yeah.
the better the future. So erasing a future is dangerous for everyone.
Yes.
And so when we could see that deeper than just the story that you mentioned here of the African Americans, we can dig deeper into the native. We can dig deeper into each of us. The society and the congregation is stronger.
Yes.
So I can see that from what you said. And I was looking around when you were speaking and could see everybody leaning in. For me, that is a good sign.
Yes.
I'm an immigrant here, but I could see that interest.
Thank you.
And for me, that is powerful, that you are here and I were able to listen to you.
Thank you. I remember that I was able to go back in my own family. So I know 2 brothers were taken from Ghana, brought into slavery, separated, ended up in Georgia. But, you know, a lot of people don't even know that. So they don't know that history beyond their grandfather. But I was one of the lucky few who were able to find that information. So what you're saying is very important. You know, we have to be about getting off that single point and saying that we have a diverse, interconnected web that we're all a part of. If we go back long enough, we may be related. Someone said it today. You know, the earth depends. We can be better stewards, but we have to start it with ourselves, because we can't help them if we don't believe it in our hearts, in our minds, in our bodies, in our spirit. This is one earth. In health, like I said, there's one health. Animals and humans and the earth. So we can be our higher self. As a UU person, that resonates with me. That's what I call myself too. And that's what I believe. So let's be the best stewards we can be.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we can leave the chairs.